What is happening, people? Welcome back. Hope you're keeping well. It's me, Harry Scarfe here, and today I'm joined by Joe Davies to talk about Mohammed Kudus. Firstly, Joe, how you doing? And talk to people a little bit about what you do.
Uh, I'm perfect, thank you, mate. I hope you're well as well. I'm studying journalism at uni. The idea is to get into sports journalism. I've been posting on Twitter and things like that for a little while, writing articles mainly, but I'm kind of looking to go into like the broadcast bit a bit. So this is a good one for me. Currently, I write for the West Ham Way. I doubt many of you watching the Spurs channel will know what that is, but basically it's run by a guy called ex-West Ham employee who you might have heard of.
Yeah.
He does like the insider stuff for West Ham. He's, ITK is a very loose term, but he is. Do you know what I mean? And there's a group of us that write for him, and I've become one of them. I write for their Patreon, and yeah, that's about all there is to say about me, I think.
Oh, good stuff. I share the same kind of trajectory, the same aim as you, and also football writer myself. So I think it's very interesting to speak to someone like-minded. So thank you very much for agreeing to come on today. It's good to talk to you. So thank you very much. If you are listening on YouTube, please do like and subscribe. If you're listening after on the podcast platform, please do drop us a follow and a 5-star review. Joe, let's kick this off. Firstly, who do you think got a better deal out of this for Mohammed Kudus, Tottenham or West Ham?
I think it's so like tight. I think if you asked a lot of West Ham fans initially when we saw 55 million, you're thinking that's a bit, it's not great. But I think the way it's sort of helped us in this window, we're kind of, what we've done with it so far has been pretty good. I think, Spurs obviously have got what I would say is like the potential Kudus has got is scary. I think the last season he had was a bit of a shaky one, but when Kudus is good, he's very, very, very good, and it shows. We stuck an £85 million release clause on him, and he he never really was going to go for that. But there was a genuine time a year ago where we thought, you know what, this guy could be worth more than that, and 85 million could be a bit low. But then he had the season he had. I think Spurs have got a very, very good deal, and I think the only way it remains to be seen if West Ham have got a better one is what they do with that money. But I think for now, it's looking like Spurs have, ripped us off a little bit.
Joe, I appreciate your honesty, Joe, on that, because I knew you wouldn't hold out for his release clause 85 million, but I thought, okay, they want 65, 70, and that was what the reports are saying to start with. But in the end, getting 55. Do you think the fact that he reportedly handed in transfer requests and was keen to force the move away from West Ham? Do you think that played a part in this? And maybe West Ham going, okay, I'm going to accept this bid and let you go.
Yeah, definitely, because I think we. David Sullivan, I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, the whole Declan Rice saga.
Yeah.
We had real issues trying to get Arsenal to pay the money. We had Man City were in for him. And you know what? We have a real issue with selling players. We always have. You think back to Payet. You remember him? He went for some crazy like 25 million. Do you know what I mean? And that's a player that was playing for West Ham. He came 17th in the Ballon d'Or rankings. The next one I can think of is Arnautovic, far and away our best player in 2019, and he left for 25 million again to China. Rice was the first time that we, had actually held out. We'd hardballed the other team, and we felt like we got a good deal there. But then you're looking at Rice now and you're thinking maybe we should have got a bit more. But at the time, 105 million was ridiculous. Now, when it comes to Kudus, I think we you know, him handing in the transfer request, and we knew he was going to go this summer, but I don't think it was expected kind of the way it did happen. He's always been very, like when he first signed, it was, Kudus he goes about things in the right way. His personality is fantastic. It was quite surprising, like the whole way the transfer planned out. We weren't expecting anything to happen with Spurs whatsoever. Obviously, we haven't sold you a player since Scott Parker, but I think it did play a part, and I think we got a lot less than we bargained for. I mean, you would have seen reports, wouldn't you, about, we wanted 60, 65 around that. But no, I think it did play a part, and I didn't think we got the deal that we wanted, but 55 is still okay, and it's allowed us to kickstart our summer, which we desperately need now.
Yeah, you really do need to push on from next season. You don't want to be in that kind of relegation scrap. But you mentioned there Scott Parker, Joe. I want to pick up on that. What does it mean to do business with Spurs after nearly 15 years of no business? The last player, was Scott Parker.
It's odd because, I mean, like I said earlier, I didn't never expect anything to happen with Spurs ever. The last time Scott Parker went in 2011.
Yeah.
And I think, it was strange, especially with Kudus. He's on the higher end of our players. Do you know what I mean? He's always pushing the top three of our best players, but he came this year. He was our most sellable asset. It would otherwise, I think, be Lucas Paqueta, but he's got the spot fixing case that still needs to be dealt with. So clubs aren't really willing to pay any money for him. But so that left off for Kudus, obviously, because we weren't going to sell Bowen, we weren't going to sell Wan-Bissaka. And when you look at selling a player from a West Ham perspective, it's never ever been in the question selling a player to Spurs. I wouldn't really. It's kind of like we almost had to cave in just because of sheer desperation. Almost like, we were so financially stuck this year. I think, we weren't able to really spend any money until we sold someone. And it really showed when we decided to open up talks with Tottenham. Because, Chelsea were in for him. He wasn't really a fan of Chelsea. I think Atletico Madrid were also there, but they never really did much. I don't think they were that interested. So it's strange, and I wonder what it does mean for the future. Do we then go on another unofficial embargo? With you, we don't sell you a player for another 15 years, or we don't buy anyone from you, or does it, kind of break a deadlock almost? And are you going to start being interested in our players again? Do you know what I mean? It's interesting. It's not fantastic from a West Ham perspective, but what can you do when you're in this situation? It's helped a little bit, the money, but it's still a bit of a sour taste almost.
I get that. It is when rivals do business, so you don't see it a lot. Tottenham, Arsenal, very little going there. Tottenham, Chelsea as well, not a lot. But especially Tottenham, West Ham, there's been nothing, as you say, for 15 years. It'll be interesting to see what is the kind of response from this. With time will tell with that one. But you talk about never expected Spurs to deal with West Ham. This comes as a surprise. With Kudus, did it ever cross your mind that he could go to Tottenham? I mean, you talk about other clubs interested potentially in reports that Atletico, Chelsea. Did you even consider that Tottenham could be an option? If we go back to the end of last season or just, a few months ago?
Never ever in a million years. Just because of how it's been purely, I think from a Spurs perspective, you would have been interested in a few players. Obviously, I'm not, gloating like we always have a good player ready for sale, because we don't. But, you were never there for Declan Rice. You were never there for Payet after you came, third in the league that year, second in the year in 2016. If like you say, if I'm thinking back to this time last year, never in a million years, we thought, Kudus, I think the best fit people saw for him was Liverpool. with Salah kind of, he was linked to a move to Saudi Arabia. Kudus kind of fits that bill of like a left-footed right winger with impressive goal-scoring ability. I think Liverpool was the best fit. Chelsea are always going to be there, I think, with that sort of player. Arsenal as well, but that was again questionable because they have Saka. But even then, they've just signed Madueke. City never really, and then United were an option, but again, questionable. I'm not really sure. But amongst all that, you could see him going to those teams, no matter who they were. A year ago, you could see that. Now, I honestly, until Fabrizio Romano dropped that first link of, Spurs are interested in Kudus, Spurs are starting talks with Kudus, trying to break this unofficial embargo, it never crossed my mind. It never has crossed my mind a West Ham player going to Tottenham, no matter who it is. And it is, it's really strange to think about. I don't think it's quite sunk in that, Kudus is going to be playing for Tottenham next year. Do you know what I mean? It's very, very odd.
It does feel weird. Even like as a Spurs fan, I'm happy to sign him, but it feels weird to see Kudus, in a Spurs shirt. In particular, after that incident he had with like Van der Ven and where Richarlison was involved, where he got sent off at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I was there myself, and I don't know. It feels weird. But it was the same with Richarlison. Obviously, he clashed with Romero when Richarlison was at Everton, and it never thought I'd see them on the same team. So you do get moments like that. But Joe, on Kudus again. How do yourself personally, but also the wider West Ham fan base, view Kudus now he's joined, obviously, your biggest, one of your rivals in Tottenham?
The reaction when he first, when they first announced it, it was very like, how would I describe it? Like sour, bitter. Do you know what I mean? We saw the announcement video. I know it's an announcement video. It's, scripted and it's not like overly how Kudus probably views it. But, what did he say? I only wanted Spurs at the start. It's, we liked Kudus. He had he had a really questionable season. Like I say, it was, if you ask a lot of West Ham fans, they'll tell you that he was very good against the big six, against teams that he supposedly wanted to play for. Not as good when it came to, say, Palace away, on a Saturday at 3:00, something like that. But he I don't know. A lot of West Ham fans now, it's not a good look, really. And I think the transfer has kind of left a very, it's tarnished a lot of what Kudus did because he had some fantastic moments with us. I mean, the one you'll see the most from West Ham is when we beat Freiburg in the Europa League a couple of years ago and he ran through their entire team, scored from that, he scored some amazing goals. That was a bicycle kick against Man City, I think, on the last day of 23-24. But he, I think if you ask the average West Ham fan, it's kind of a bit bitter. And I think when he comes to the London Stadium next year, it's not going to be a great reception for him at all. It depends how a lot see the rivalry now. I think a lot see it as a bit less intense than it would have been a decade, maybe 2 decades ago. But there's still a lot of very diehard West Ham fans in that stadium. And I think, it will be interesting to see when you do come to the London Stadium, how he is received. But I do not see it being a good one at all, really.
No. Nor do I. I have to ask the next question. Will West Ham recover after the loss of their best player? And if he's not your best player, where does Kudus rank among your best?
I think, well, to start, I wouldn't say he was our best player. I think he falls second to Jarrod Bowen, maybe even third to Wan-Bissaka. I think it actually didn't leave like a huge dent for us because the way he's he is a right winger that cuts inside. That is Jarrod Bowen. He can play elsewhere, but when we put him elsewhere, he never really fit the we used to shoehorn him onto the left to accommodate Bowen, and it never really worked. There was never a game where Kudus played on the left where you thought like this guy's ridiculous. Do you know what I mean? But he I think we'll be okay. I think as long as we keep some of our players fit, we need to keep the likes of Somerville fit this year. We need to keep Fulkrug fit this year, and I think if we manage that, then I don't think we'll miss Kudus very much. Where I think it has left us is Kudus has incredible individual ability to get out of situations. Like if he's I think that there was a clip yesterday, wasn't there, in your friendly where there's it's him and Spence and there's 4 players around them, 5 players around them, and he gets out of it. It's what he's good at. And it can really open up some nice situations for you. But I think, it depends who we replace him with and what the plan is this year, because a lot of West Ham fans don't really know. Potter was kind of sailing through the end of the year. We just needed to stay up. We were in a bad state. And I think it would be interesting to see, but I don't think, it's left a huge dent because we have Bowen. I think, if we didn't have Bowen and we needed to find a new right winger, then we'd have a real issue because Kudus is unique. But I think we'll manage just about.
Okay, fair enough. I like the optimism. Are you surprised that Kudus didn't play in a number 10 role for you? Talk about him being accommodated on the left. I'll get onto that a little bit later about why we think he struggled. That could be a potential reason because he played 45% of his minutes at Ajax, I believe it was, in that number 10 position. Are you surprised he didn't play there? Obviously, you do have Lucas Paquetá.
Yeah, a bit. I think we tried it a couple of times. I remember the first game we tried it. We played Everton at home. It was the start of 23-24. He was we just signed him at this point, and it was I think it was his first start for us, or it was his second start. And he was good, but the problem we had was that, we had Lucas Paquetá, like you say, and I think Kudus is good there, but I think Paquetá was better suited to us there. And we hit a situation where Mikel Antonio has, injury problems, and this year the same with Fulkrug. We almost had to kind of adjust to that, and we ended up doing something where it was kind of like Paquetá on the left a bit, Bowen in the middle, and then Kudus on the right, or it was Paquetá in the middle with Bowen and Kudus in front of him, that sort of thing, like a dynamic front three almost, with no real out and out striker. So there became less and less opportunity for him to play the number 10 role. I would have liked to see it more, if I'm honest, but I can see why it didn't happen. Paquetá was in his first year. Paquetá was incredible. In Kudus' first year, I think he did get a bad injury, and that set us back. And then Bowen got a bad injury, and Kudus is good, but he's not going to carry the entire West Ham team on his own. And I can see it more with Spurs. I can see him playing there more. But again, that obviously for you, that depends on Maddison. Kulusevski's there. It's tough to tell. I would have liked to see it more because I think we could have made something work, especially when Paqueta's available on the left.
Yeah.
But, for some reason that never happened. And it would have been interesting to see how it works. And, if Thomas Frank does see that as an option, then I think it can work for you. Because like you say, he did it at Ajax and he was very good there. And it's well known that he is right winger or number 10 predominantly. So, it would be interesting to see. But I do think I would have liked to see him more West Ham.
Indeed, I'm surprised that he wasn't seen more there. I don't know whether I get the opportunity for us to obviously does depend on injuries because you have, as you say there, we do have lots of depth in that 10 role because Bergvall can play there, Madison can play there, Kulusevski can play there. So we have got a little bit of depth. And if we get Morgan Gibbs-White over the line, that's currently an unknown, then we do have unreal depth. Surprisingly in that position, not in other areas, but in that one position in particular. A couple of questions for you here, Joe. Firstly, what impact will the money from Kudus do you think have on the West Ham squad, and where do you want it to be spent specifically?
Well, so far, we sold Kudus straight away. 2 days later, we signed El Hadji Malik Diouf from Slavia Prague, who is a left wing back. It shows like we're kind of manoeuvring into like a back five. I think we needed a left back. I think, Emerson will be leaving, and that leaves us really short because Cresswell has already left as well. That leaves us with our academy graduate, Ollie Scarfe, who has had a good breakout season. He's not fully there, but it's almost like watching, when Declan Rice first broke through. And I don't know if you remember Ben Johnson as well.
Yeah.
We need someone else there. And it's kind of he played his first preseason game yesterday, looks excellent. I think it's a really smart signing. I think we're doing the right thing with the money. We're kind of, instead of seeing 55 million and going, yes, we're going to buy a 55 million player, we're going for kind of the better value for money options. Kind of low cost, high reward sort of signing, And Diouf has been a very good start. And then obviously this morning, we signed Kyle Walker-Peters. He was, you'll know him very well. He free transfer, but it shows again we're kind of going for the low cost, high reward options. And I think we just need to do more of the same. I think, the only problem we've got is 55 million. I'm sure we'll have a little bit more than that, but 55 million doesn't. We have a lot of positions we need to fill, and I think we need, for starters, we need a goalkeeper. Fabianski's left. Probably a new centre back if we're going into a back five. We're going to need we need a whole midfield overhaul. I think Edson Alvarez will probably leave. There's a chance if Paqueta gets cleared that he goes. And then Guido Rodriguez, who we signed last year, is not really fitting the bill at all. So that leaves you with Souček and Ward-Prowse. Both good, but, they can't really work a midfield on their own. And when you have those two, we had it under David Moyes a couple of times where it was those two in midfield. They just get run through. Neither of them are particularly quick. So we need almost like we lost it heavily with Rice, where it's like a physical but quick and, dynamic and things like that. We desperately need to reshape the midfield. Aside from that, I'd say it depends. Antonio's still kind of negotiating contracts, things like that. But we need a striker as well, I'd say. Both of our strikers, Farouk and Antonio, are very injury prone. Danny Ings has just left, and he was never really up there anyway. But, I think we need an option there. And obviously the striker market is very, it is expensive, and we're going to have to find another good value for money signing. I don't know where we're going to do that. We haven't really had a look. But it's kind of, you can see the direction we're going in. And I think if we make more signings like we have with Diouf and Walker-Peters, then I think we could be in for a good summer, but we need to sort it out quickly. And I think it's tough to know what the real priority is, but I would say midfield, and then obviously goalkeeper, and then probably a striker.
Temporarily, we'll take a dive away from Kudus because I want to keep the subject on transfers. You mentioned Walker-Peters there firstly. Yeah, that's a really good signing. I mean, myself personally, I struggled to find many cons for it. I think it sorts a lot of your fullback issues out. You can play both sides. Do you see it as a really smart signing? Obviously, you talk about low value, was for free, but do you think it's a good one?
Yeah, I think we at the moment it looks like obviously Wan-Bissaka won our Player of the Year um, last year, and he's obviously going to be starting on the right hand side. I think Juve is only 20 years old. It's tough to tell what they're going to do with him, but I think he Slavia Prague fans kind of they rate him highly. They think his potential is astronomical. We already spent 22 million on him. At 20 years old, it would be crazy if he wasn't starting. Do you know what I mean? I think Walker Peters with his versatility, he can play both sides. I think the big thing with that signing is that Wan-Bissaka will be off to AFCON in January.
Yeah.
With Congo, and Diouf will be off with Senegal, which obviously leaves us really short in the fullback positions. But then you've got Walker Peters, who can play both. He's looked good for Southampton. He'll be able to play wherever we need him, and I think it's exactly what you say. It's hard to see the cons really. He provides fantastic cover. Maybe he'll be good enough to start. We don't know, but he provides cover and almost that reliability that we desperately lack at the moment because we've signed last year. We signed a lot of names rather than reliable figures, and it cost us big time. And I think Walker Peters is one of those where he's quite low key, but he gets on with it, and he will be able to cover those two positions that we're going to lose in January, but. Obviously, the pair of them could get injured as well, and that provides the cover for that. We're going to need him in the competitions. He's, I think he's a really strong option to have, and I think it's a really, really smart signing, especially on a free. We were looking at him starting for us last year before we signed Wan-Bissaka. So I'm really pleased with it. I think it's a top signing. I think it's the exact type of signing that you want West Ham to make.
Yeah, that's understandable. We were linked with him ourselves. I think mainly more because like quotas you have to meet. You have to like 4, I think, homegrown players in the Champions League, or you take a smaller squad. We currently only have 1 for context. So at the moment, we're going to have to take the smaller squad in the Champions League, which isn't ideal. We talk about players like Kudus, so they're going to get in, and that's a serious conversation that needs to be had. So I think we were linked to players like Dennis Sirkin, Kyle Walker-Peters, former players that we had. So I think you. Good bit of business there. While we're probably thinking about it, I think you've gone and got it done. But can I ask you about Evan Ferguson? Obviously, I know he's not a West Ham player, but went on loan to West Ham. Do you think Brighton have got a good deal here? I read that now it's only a loan, according to Fabrizio Romano, and a £40 million or euro fee. So who do you think, again, has got the better deal, Roma or Brighton? Because that fee's quite a lot, but it seems to be optional.
It's really hard to tell because Ferguson, I'll be honest, was not very good for us at all. It was a bit strange, to be honest, because, I mean, it shows, I actually forgot to mention it earlier when I was talking about, our striker options and Danny Ings going, we've lost Ferguson as well. But Ferguson was one who never really got a look in. And he, it was odd because it was Graham Potter that signed him. He was the one that gave him his big breakthrough at Brighton. All of a sudden, you remember when he broke through, it was talks of £100 million, and this guy's the next big thing at striker. But he couldn't get minutes for us. I couldn't tell you why. He was never injured. He was never, like. You never had any issues. You never heard of any problems with anyone or anything like that. I don't. Honestly, I don't know what happened, but I think Brighton have got the better end of the deal. It'll be interesting. I mean, Roma have been smart getting a loan with an option to buy, because if he does do well there, I mean, I know Gasparini's going to have, he's fantastic for strikers. He transformed another one of our former strikers, Scamacca, absolutely transformed him at Atalanta. And now he's got Ferguson at Roma, and I think Ferguson will benefit from a completely different change in environment. He could be good over there. It'll be interesting to see how he does, but I'm not sure. It is a bit strange. I think 40 million is a bit much considering he hasn't done anything in a long time now. But I don't know. It'd be interesting to see. I think, Gasperini could get a lot out of him. Serie A is kind of better for his sort of striker. You think, Tammy Abraham, before his ACL injury, went over there, did well. Obviously, I've told you about Skamaka. You've got that sort of, tall striker is kind of, it's the move over there. Osimhen as well, obviously the big one, before he fell out with Conte or whatever it was. But
yeah, that's true.
It's tough to tell. I think Roma could have a good deal if he has a good year. I think it's best for all parties, to be honest. I think Brighton might look at it in a year's time and think, we should have got more. But I think, the way Ferguson has been the last couple of years, I think it's tough to tell who's got the better deal. But I think, all parties have got a pretty good deal there.
I think that'd be fair, but for me, who's got the better deal depends on a couple of things. Whether that 40 million, I think it's 40 million pounds, I could be wrong, is optional, or whether it's like, it's got to happen. It's an obligation. That is for me key, and this, and also who pays the wages. Because if Roma are paying all the wages, then in my opinion, a Brighton point of view, that is a really good deal because his wages covered, and if they like him, they've got an option to sign him. It's guaranteed money. If not, well, you haven't paid his wages this year. But if all of a sudden Brighton are paying all or the majority of his wages and they don't trigger that, if it is an option, then I don't think that's very positive for Brighton. And as you say, depends how he gets on. I personally think he's going to rip it up. I think he's going to do really well there. I totally agree with you that other leagues are suited better to other players. Prime example, somehow we still here. Tottenham have a young winger, Brian Gill, very short, good low sense of gravity. Just isn't right for the Premier League. Gets pushed off the ball, but he's going to go to Spain again, and he's going to be very good. He just suits the kind of Spanish style. You have others like Italian football that maybe prefer to play a little bit slower, that suits them. I think it'll suit Ferguson, big striker, as you say, hold the ball up. So it'll be interesting to see how he does get on. But back to Kudus, Joe, what impact do you think Kudus will have on Frank's side?
The way I saw the move initially was Kudus is Thomas Frank's new Brian Mbeumo. I think you can see what direction Frank is trying to go in, and Kudus will absolutely fit that. He's the exact same. It's the trend again of what I was mentioning earlier of the right-sided player cutting in onto their left foot. I wouldn't say Kudus and Mbeumo are identical, but the idea is there, and I think it'd be interesting to see what he does with Kulusevski, whether Kulusevski fits that bill, whether he substitutes Maddison out, because I think Kudus does start in that team, and I think he for Thomas Frank, I think he'll have looked at Kudus straight away, and I think that's why you pushed ahead so hard, is that you weren't going to spend 70 million on Brian Mbeumo, but well, to be fair, you might have done if he didn't say he wanted to go to United. But I think in terms of who was available after that, I think Kudus is the next best option. And Mbeumo scored something crazy like 18, 19 goals last year. One of the best attackers in the league by a country mile. And I think Kudus can absolutely replicate that. He's got every attribute. He's young, he's quick, he's incredible dribbler. This is the one thing you'll notice. I said it before, he has this really, really unique ability. He doesn't look it, but he is so strong, and trying to get the ball off him is impossible. I saw something about it was Pedro Porro, was it, when he signed? He was like, thankfully I only have to deal with your 1v1s in training now. He's almost like Mbeumo, but a little bit. He's not the exact same, do you know what I mean? But it's the same sort of concept. And Kudus does have goal-scoring ability. He didn't score very much last year, but in the year before that, he did get a decent amount in a short amount of time. He's, I think, like I say, I do just look at it as the Mbeumo alternative, and I think Thomas Frank has got exactly who he wants in that position. He's had Brian Mbeumo for years, even stemming back from the Championship, and he's never shifted once. And no one has ever seemed to figure that out. Mbeumo has always been consistently good, and I think Kudus will be the exact same. I think if Frank coaches him in the same way he had, coached Mbeumo and things like that, then I think you've got something very exciting going on there. If you can find something for Kudus to work with, I mean, you've already got Solanke, who, he had an okay first year, but I think, the potential is there to be unlocked still.
Agree.
It's. I'm interested to see. I don't think Frank will everything figured out straight away, especially with Kudus. But I think Kudus, in terms of what you're looking at and the current outlook of your squad, I think Kudus is the one that fits the Thomas Frank system to a T in the attack. And I'm not going to enjoy it, but I do think it will work out pretty nicely for him.
Again, I do appreciate your honesty. It's really refreshing to hear that you think that he's the next best thing to Mbeumo that's currently available in the market. I do agree with you, and we were linked initially to Mbeumo, but I think once it was reported that he wanted Man United, I think we weren't mentioned at all. It was only ever Man United for several weeks in the end, but it was like this is seen by Spurs fans as a Xavi Simons and Mbeumo, the Eze kind of not replacement, but the alternative. So it's interesting to hear as well from an outsider feel the same. But you talk about Kudus dropping off last year. Correct me if I'm wrong, but something like 5 goals, 3 assists. What do you think led to the drop off, though?
Honestly, I think we had a real issue with everyone other than Bowen and Wan-Bissaka, where when Julian Lopetegui first came in, we completely reshaped the model that worked for us under Moyes. We were counter-attacking. We were, we never had very high possession, and that led to the whole argument of should Moyes still be here? It's not the most entertaining style of play. So we switched things around. We got a new sporting director, Tim Steiden, and then Lopetegui came in as manager. We signed 9 players last summer, and quite frankly, the only one I can think of that worked was Wan-Bissaka. We signed a lot of big names. We signed Todibo, who was linked with pretty much everyone in the top 6. He hasn't really cut it. We spent 40 million on Max Kilman, who's been okay, but, still begs the question, 40 million, is that really worth it? And then it was Somerville, who was the best player in the championship that year. Nothing ever came of that. He was okay for a bit, and then he got injured, and he hasn't played since. I think that then led to, we were very disjointed as a team, and it became for a long, long time, you'll find things with me saying, another West Ham fan saying that we couldn't really tell what we were trying to do. And that obviously then led to Lopetegui losing his job. Potter came in, he did a bit, but it's still so hard to try and fix that without any of your own players. And I just think the dynamic of the squad didn't work, and it led to a massive, dip in a lot of players' form. Bowen even didn't hit the highs that he'd hit the year before. He broke our Premier League goal scoring record in a single season. Paqueta fell off a cliff, who was fantastic the year before. Souček, Emerson was close to our player of the year before. Nowhere to be seen that season under Lopetegui. And then it came to Kudus, and it was like he was just a result of that. And it hit him hard because not only did he have that, but he was then forced to play out of position. He kind of a lot will say that his attitude was questioned because he only ever really seemed to turn it on when we played against the Big Six. I don't know if that was 100% fully the case. It did certainly seem like that at a point in the season, but Kudus can turn it on at any given point, and I think now that he has got a big move to Tottenham, I think you might see a different side of him. But he just became a byproduct of a team that just wasn't working. We were 17th for the majority of the year, and we, the team wasn't working for the entirety of last season. Any West Ham fan will tell you we had no like system almost. Like, you see with a lot of teams, they've got their fixed way of playing. I'll say to you, Thomas Frank at Brentford, you could tell exactly what they were doing. They were organised. They had it worked out, and that's why Wissa and Mbeumo they flourished last year massively because they had things figured out. With us, there wasn't any of that. It was, give the ball to Jarrod Bowen and hope almost, and then hope that Wan-Bissaka can recover it if he loses the ball. But I think Kudus predominantly became a byproduct of a very disjointed team, and I think if Thomas Frank can get things working over the summer and he can get your squad in a good shape by the time the season rolls around next month, I think I think he'll be okay because he's in a much clearer space. There was a lot of issues around West Ham last year, and you heard. I remember there was a story about Kudus, falling out with the manager. That doesn't happen. It rarely happens. And Lopetegui caused a lot of problems for us, and Kudus never really recovered from that. I think he will recover from no matter where he went. If he he just needed the new season and he needed like a fresh start. And I think, we were such a mess last year that it's impossible for any player to really look good in that. So, I think it was an issue of he kind of lost his direction, but also that was because the team had lost its direction. And I think he'll be able to get out of that sort of mindset now that he's at Tottenham and that he's under Frank, who's got the perfect role for him. So I think it's a tough one. I think he'll be okay though.
Joe, on what you said, away from Kudus for just a second, do you think that the issue last season was the manager and Lopetegui? Was it his system? Was it the fact you mentioned there 9 players all at once? We saw Forest struggle when they brought in a lot of players. It never seems to do well for newly promoted sides either when they bring in a lot of players at once. Or do you think it's a combination of all these things which led to the struggles and him being sacked ultimately?
Yeah, I think with him, it was really, really strange the way it all happened. So the way it played out from memory, we had Tim Steidten, right, who was massively supported by a lot of people. He came in and the way it worked was people saw him as the guy that it wasn't the case, but it became an issue within the club where people saw him as the guy that kind of orchestrated Bayer Leverkusen's invincible season. He was there and then he came to us and he was, I remember the first deal where everyone kind of looked at Steidten and went, flipping out, like, this guy can really this guy's good in the transfer market was Kudus. Kudus was the year we got him. Even then, he was massively sought after by, Chelsea wanted him, Arsenal wanted him. He looked like he was going to Brighton at one point, I think, as well. And we managed to get him completely out of nothing. We weren't linked until a long while after everyone else was. And we signed him, and that worked for a bit. That window, we only signed 4 players, and they worked for us under Moyes. And then we gave Steidten full control after Moyes had left, and it just kind of, I think initially Steidten wanted Ruben Amorim, and that didn't happen because we weren't willing to pay the money to get Amorim out of his Sporting contract, and that then led to, scrambling around for any manager we could find that was, free. And Lopetegui was right there. He'd done an okay job with Wolves just before he'd come to us. And we kind of just accepted it, really. And, Lopetegui's got a decent CV. He managed Real Madrid for a little bit. He was, the Spain national manager. Did very well with Sevilla, most notably, won a Europa League. But he kind of, I don't really know why, but we signed 9 players And what you're saying is, is true. We sign 9 players, and that doesn't really work when you sign so many players. It's rare that it works straight off the bat. You're trying to fit. Off the top of my head, we'd signed Tadibo, Somerville, Kilman, Wan-Bissaka, players that were never really going to be involved. We signed Wes Fodder. Did it go there?
Yeah, I lost you a little bit. It's all right. I think it's all good now.
We signed.
I think Joe's having some technical issues. Right, Joe, I believe we've got you back. Can I ask you briefly, because you mentioned David Moyes, how do you view him now? Do you think he was underappreciated looking back?
So Moyes is kind of, when you look at him now, we do think, a lot of the fan base didn't really know what we had. We had such a successful era, and then people got almost quite bored with it. They wanted a bit of change, and you look back on it now and you think we're in such a poor position. We've just finished 14th. We've had a rubbish season. Trying to transition into a more so-called entertaining style of play doesn't really, it doesn't really compare to what we had initially. And I think a lot of fans would go back to what we had before, because Moyes finished. The argument you'll see a lot is that Moyes finished his last season very badly. We had 6 months where Bowen got injured for 3 months, and Paqueta was injured for, I think, around the same amount of time. And we'd gone from having our best start in Premier League history in the first half of the season to like one of the worst finishes we'd ever had. It was literally a tale of two halves. And he, it's tough to tell, from my own perspective. I'd absolutely have, I would have stuck with him then and see where we are now, because we had a project there. The team was entirely his. He'd been there for 4 years. We were pushing Europe year on year on year. We weren't quite there in his last season. We came 9th, but even then, 9th is still 5 places above where we just finished in the year after, where we were supposedly making a positive change, and it hasn't worked out. What I will say, though, is I think, Potter has got a real opportunity here where, he can instill a new culture at West Ham. He can, he's very similar to Moyes in the sense that, he works well on a small budget. He's suited to a club like West Ham, not really like a big 6th club, which is why, I'll always liken, Potter's time at Chelsea to Moyes at Man United. It's a similar sort of situation. And I am interested to see how Potter does, because I think it's safe to say we can sort of write off the second half of last season. Potter was never recovering and achieving anything special. He was able to sign Evan Ferguson on loan, but that was all he could do in the transfer window. And then that left us with the same disjointed team and same disjointed culture that we had, that Lopetegui had left behind him. So it'd be interesting to see. I think as time goes on, history will be kind to David Moyes. I think, people will look back in maybe 10 years and go like, we actually had something really special going on there. It doesn't happen at West Ham. You don't get into Europe 3 years in a row and win a trophy. History will be kind to him. And I think, He'll be looked upon as time goes on as one of the best managers we ever had. It's tough for people to accept now because they're kind of stuck to their opinion of, the style of play was boring and I don't want to go to games every week and watch us not have very much possession. But I think, the more that sort of ideology fades out of people's minds, it will be easier to look at it and go, yeah, he actually it's the first manager in a long, long time to have something serious going on for us.
Yeah, won a trophy at the end of the day. Back to Kudus for a second, and then we get to end of season expectations, how we feel going into a new season. Do you think Kudus will be like a constant competition with Brennan Johnson for that place on the right wing, or do you see Kudus as like a level above Brennan Johnson?
If you'd asked me a year ago whether I would rather have Kudus or Brennan Johnson on my right hand side, I probably would have said Kudus. Johnson he had like a pretty sort of up and down season just now, if I'm right. He had that period where he was scoring every week for like what was it, like 8-9 weeks, but that obviously then dipped. I don't really. I think they will be in constant competition at the start. I don't think Brennan Johnson deserves to lose his place whatsoever. I think, Kudus will have to break in and he will have to earn his spot, even if there is a new manager. But, I can see them being in constant competition, but I think Kudus has got the sort of the attributes to be more successful in a Frank team and to be more of a prospect going forward. I think at the end of the day, if you stuck both players at their peak and you go, who's better? I think I'd say Kudus, to be honest. Maybe,
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Could be due to the fact that, I've watched Kudus week in, week out for the past 2 years and not Brennan Johnson. But I'd say I've watched a decent amount of Brennan Johnson. And I think, Brennan Johnson is a good player. You can't dispute that. I just think, yeah, we both agree. I think if you have both players at their peak, then I think Kudus is above Johnson. But the issue is can you establish that consistency within Kudus, or is Johnson going to be a step ahead because he's been at the club for longer? It is tough to tell, but I think the new manager will play more into Kudus' hands. But I think they'll be in competition for a while. But I can see Kudus eventually coming out on top.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. It's interesting to hear about that. I'd like them both. If I had to make the comparison, I'd probably say that Johnson is generally more consistent, but Kudus has more potential and ultimately, the higher market value. He's ultimately a better player, can unlock defenses and can, kind of carry the team on his own. I think we've seen that in moments that you talk about, even like Reading, he gets out of that tight situation. That's all by him. There's no one's helping him and everyone's against him almost, and he just finds a way out. So he's definitely got a lot more to him, but Johnson is consistent. You're right last season about Johnson. For me, the goals and assists were regularly there. His numbers are really impressive. I think they're decent. Put it that way, decent. That'd be fair. But it's the performances as well. Will go missing in a game and then score. I don't have a problem with that because goals and assists, in my opinion, win your games. But people go, yeah, but I want more. I want him to take on his man. I want him to track back. And that's also reasonable points. Before we get to those end of season predictions, Joe, I just want two numbers for this. I don't want why. How many goals and assists do you think Kudus will get in the Premier League next season for Tottenham? So firstly, goals and then assists.
I'm going to go 9 goals, 6 assists.
So better than his last season. I hope that he'd get a few more assists, but I don't think 9 goals would be awful. But depends on if the goals are distributed out. I don't think that's bad. Okay. 9 goals, 6 assists.
I have like, you don't want the reason, but I just think the way Frank is, I can see the goals becoming more of like the priority for him. But I'll leave it at that. I won't give you any more reason.
No, thank you. I feel similar. I'm thinking, I was thinking like 10 goals, but I was hoping a few more assists. I was thinking 12 or 13, but being ambitious at the moment. We don't know, again, if the goals are going to be distributed. So we'll have to see. I think it'd be definitely very key either way. But let's get into it before we wrap up. What are your thoughts and expectations, Joe, for West Ham going into the season, and where do you think you'll finish in the league?
I think it's another transition season for us almost, but I think it's more of a positively looking one than last year did. I think it heavily depends on the window we have at the moment. it's really hard to tell. Like I say, we need to massively reshape the midfield. Whether we do that remains to be seen. And after, honestly, I can't tell you, before we do that, whether it will be, the case. But there's a lot of sort of a more of a feel-good factor around West Ham now. Pre-season yesterday was good. There's been a lot of reports about, there's been like the fresh start is really helping the team. I can see. I don't think we'll be in European places or anything like that. I can see like a 10th or an 11th, like a mid-table sort of, not scrapping relegation, but not really pushing much either. I can see sort of, trying to gain that stability and then going from there. I'm not expecting anything insane, but I can see it being an okay season for us. So yeah, about 10th or 11th.
Okay, and what do you think for my club, Tottenham? What do you think?
I think it's looking quite good for you, to be honest. I mean, Kudus is a big signing. Yeah, you've had that. What's his Vuskovic come in?
Yeah, Vuskovic. Yeah,
Everyone was. Yeah, I don't. Apparently he was insane yesterday. He could be a good option for you. I reckon, you're not coming 17th again, put it that way. I think, I think, I can see like maybe a 6th, 5th or 6th or 7th around there.
Yeah, I actually agree with both of yours. I was thinking in my head, I had West Ham between 10th and 12th, and I had Spurs like 5th being ambitious, but 6th more realistically. So glad we aligned.
Yeah.
But Joe, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you very much. Where can people find you across social media?
So the main place you're going to find me at the moment, there's not really much else going for me, but the main place you're going to find me is at WHU Joe on Twitter, or X, whichever you prefer to call it. And yeah, from that point on, you'll find me, you'll find my articles on a Patreon or something like that. I'm looking to branch out eventually to other platforms, but for now, if you want to find me, that is the main place you'll find me.
Great stuff. Keep up the good work. Thank you for joining me today. And if you're listening on YouTube, please do like and subscribe. If you're listening after on a podcast platform, please do drop us a follow and a 5-star review. Hope you enjoyed, should I say, this one. Can't get the words out. It's time to end for sure. Thank you very much for watching, though.